Composing Gloves here, and today I'm going to be showing you how to make this bass wobble FM sound thing. So yeah, that's pretty much it. I threw together the rest of this really quick just as sort of like a little backing track, because what the heck, you know, let's get a little creative while we're doing our sound design. So this is a Sounds Like. It was originally a remix by this guy called the Sex Whale. Like, that's his name. I don't even know, man. Okay, people have their names. I'm Composing Gloves. I'm perfect. I think that's a more normal name, but hey, this guy is pretty good at sound design. So he made this sound, and someone saw one of my videos and said, hey, didn't realize you do this, is Rulesy. And they said, can you make a sound that sounds like this track? And I was like, give me a sound and a timestamp. Typically, I'll go to my website or whatever, but you know what? YouTube probably is the best way to reach me. And I have made a sound similar. They didn't want the exact same sound, but I tried to get pretty close to the original. It's within reason. And I'm at a point where you could finesse it and do what you want it to be. There's a lot, like huge amount of timbre changes. I actually ended up saving 3 different presets in the process of making this one, because I decided to start doing that because I came up with a whole bunch of other cool sounds, and sometimes it's tough to get back those sounds if you don't save them right then and there. So it sounds like he might have had a filter thing. You could see he actually uses FL Studio, so that was like, oh, okay, at least he's using the same DAW. And one thing, so yeah, he did this wobbly thing without all the extra jazz going on here. This is what it sounds like. And surprisingly, this whole thing is in just one citrus. That is pretty loud. I wonder how I wonder if I'm gonna have to tape that down in post. So basically, it looks kind of scary. It does, but it's pretty simple. Now, if you are wondering how a sound like this is made or how I make decisions like this in the first place, go check out my Learn FM synthesis. It's like Learn FM from the ground up, something along those lines. Go check out that series. I explain a lot of the basic rules and principles to using FM. So we have here some interesting options, but the main idea is we have a triangle wave being operated on by 3 other operators in a serial fashion and a parallel fashion. And in some cases, and of course, citrus from the ground up as well, because I'm going to be talking about this as if you know citrus, like I know citrus. And I have series where I teach you how to use citrus. So I expect, you know, that bit of knowledge to be there. So as you can see, parallel fashion, and then we have a serial, another serial, and then another serial chain affecting one. And it's interesting because each one of these spots will modulate things slightly differently. And I'm basically, when I'm doing something like a cluster kind of like this, I'm aiming for small timbre. You can see none of the knobs are turned very much because very much modulation index would ruin the sound. And so you listen to a sound like that, and I know immediately that it is some sort of distortion. I can guess synthesis, but you could probably come to things that are reasonably close using delay lines with additive synthesis. You'd be a ways off on timbre. You'd be crap shooting a little bit trying to get the timbre to sound just right. So I happen to know, oh, this sounds like FM. So I pulled out some FM. He didn't show me the plugins, or at least I didn't bother to look at what plugins he was using. So, you know, that was a shot in the dark. And I have this delay on at this itsy bitsy time. I think it's like 04 or whatever it is. And that is within Haas affected territory, giving me some extra grime. If I take it off, if I turn off my delay on the effects out, you hear it? It adds that extra little, like, the teeth just got a little bit sharper on it. So that's basically what I was going for. So anyways, you generate it, you FM it, and then you distort the living snot out of it. And it's important in sound design like this to turn on your distortion first. And normally I'd go into a separate plug, but I was like, hey, you know what? Citrus has its own wave shaper. I'll just use that. So I routed 1, because the only thing coming out of this is actually just 1. There's no low stuff. You might consider mixing in a sub bass maybe through 6, because we're not using 6 or 5 maybe. But anyways, I'm using 1. 1 is going out here and out up here. The effect out, I have the chorus order off and the delay on with a very slight delay, and that's pretty much it. The effect out is the wave shaper, and I did mess with a variety of wave shapes. I came up with this curve. I'm not going to touch it because it's a very touchy thing. Or you know what? I'm going to, we could just save a preset real quick. This is what you should be doing. Composing gloves, bass, and we could name it. I already have one named whale. Whale safe. Just so I know that I've got this. Okay, so now if we were to... This actually isn't as touchy as I thought it would be. If we come up here to up here is where it gets touchy. So anyways, you set that. I did take my time setting it though and getting it right where I wanted it. And then we come up here and now how do you make these decisions? So when there's some FM experience sort of required to make sounds like this. So for example, you have to listen and you got to listen to the timbre and then you got to be like, all right, does that sound like a note that was high being FM'd high? And in most cases, that's no. Most cases, it's a note. And in this case, I happen to know that I could get something close by playing a note that was low and FMing that to create a spectrum above it. Now, people who make these sounds, like the Sex Whale guy, for example, he probably was just doing his thing and he wasn't thinking about all this crazy stuff. He just knew that if he did these things, it'd come out good. Like, that's usually the creative process. You're not busy trying to theory your way into things, but here we're trying to theory our way into things. So I figured it's got to be a low note, but he's got these higher notes. The thing was very playable. You could play it high and low. So it had sort of this mid-range feel to it. So I knew I couldn't go too low, but I knew that when you do go low, like these F4, which isn't really that low, it gets pretty beefy. So I decided to go 0.25. So originally it's at 2, and I lowered it an octave, another octave, and then another octave. So I lowered it 3 octaves to get it here. So that's my bass wave, and all the modulation is hitting that wave. And because it's so low, it's super low, but when the modulation hits it, it causes it to rise up. The low tone is there, but the harmonics overwhelm it, and you get a psychoacoustic effect where the harmonic series implies that there is a fundamental there, and your brain sort of fills the rest in. So it's one of those things. So you'll notice that these are pretty high notes. And that's why. Now, I'm going to throw something at you that's going to be a little weird. So you notice that my X mappings are a little funny. So I'm modulating this guy. That's the guy that's moving around. And that's what this is controlling. So it's controlling that. And then the bass notes are, of course, up there. And the smoothing's off. That's really important. Turn your smoothing off. That's pretty basic. But you'll notice that he's got some sort of a filter. He probably may have modulated and connected X to the volume. So I was like, oh, you know what? I'll do that because that's what it sounds like. Because when it turns off, there's not like residual effect. The sound ends. And you got to time these things so that it doesn't sound like it got shot like wow, wow. You want to be like wow, wow, or however they had their particular setup. So I mapped it like this and it came out pretty nice. On 2, you will notice that I have it slightly off the center. If it's directly on the center, it's not quite as... It gets a much different bite a lot faster if I do it off. So that's what I decided to do. Now, I'm going to throw... Here's the weird curveball thing. That wasn't the weird curveball thing. That's kind of like, oh, I guess that's kind of advanced. But here, if you FM a triangle wave by itself, you get some really weird crap, and then I'm modulating it here. You might be saying, how'd you make that decision? Originally, this was a sine wave, and if you modulate a sine wave against itself, you'll get a saw wave series. And you notice it's going in the opposite direction. All this stuff is sort of arbitrary over time as I got closer and closer to the timbre that I wanted. Once I was pretty close, I ended up going to a triangle wave. It sounded really clear and crisp. And so I was like, you know what? I'm going to go with that. So I just went with the triangle wave for that reason. But I did create most of this patch with a sine wave there. Okay, so 2. Now, the rest of these things are pretty much all some sort of a triangle wave or almost triangle, like half saw, half triangle, like this guy. And basically, the reason is, if you watch my FM from the ground up series, of course, we want these straight lines. Straight lines are important for really clean stuff. And that was the sound that he had in his sound. So I was like, oh, there's definitely that. There might have been like a sine wave mix somewhere in there. It's still very possible, but I got pretty close going this route. So I was like, hey, that's something you can change. For example, here's our sound right now. Let's play the low note. It's kind of, whoa, that's aggressive. If we take it down, You see, you just hear how it's just different. And you'll also get different tones according to the angle that these are set at. But we're not going to talk about that because that's like, people will blow their brains out, man. It'll get too crazy. So basically, you start turning these. And originally, I was going parallel. So I was turning on 2, 3, and 4 and trying to get the sounds that way. So you get that. So you can see we get a huge number of textures. If we immediately add 2 though, watch this. So what is the deal here? So there are various ratios going on, and I was going after it, and we have here a triangle wave at 1.5 and another one at 7.5. Why? Because when they are not falling in the same harmonic ratio, when they aren't perfect multiples of each other, you get like mid bands in between, and that creates a very dynamic texture that we can use to our advantage. And so I went for that, and that it works really well. Similar things, you can accomplish similar things by using 3 and 7, things that just don't naturally fall, but it won't be as profound as going like 1.5. And you don't want to go like 1.4, 1.3 unless, but you'd go there for other reasons. But in this particular, what we were aiming for here, I didn't want to go there. I know I didn't show you a before example. That's just because I'm not sure if I can like play that or whatever. I don't know. I'm not going to mess with the whole going on Facebook thing. So what we have here, we have these, so I turn those on slightly, right? So I'm turning these guys, and tiny moves make big differences, especially on the ones that don't fall in the harmonic ratio, because that simple move here can change the entire harmonic series. So you got to be sort of careful with how you do this, because if I move it just a tad, like that much, the upper one's making the biggest impact here. So you gotta be like, ooh, watch out for that. So as you see here, as we add in these, now what are these guys doing? Well, they're adding a tinge of this inharmonicness to these guys. So when you do it in serial, it's going to start moving, and that'll shift the whole series on how these guys are modulating one. And as you do this confangled mess and you mess with ratios a crap ton, you eventually will reach the point where you will get something reasonably close, and you could continue to work on it and try and get your waveforms, because maybe your modulating waveforms aren't quite right. You have to, maybe they add a high harmonic in there somewhere. Usually those are, you can hear those and guess those though. So there's a method to the madness though. Like you start with your wave, you have an idea, like low harmonic, modulated to create big texture, modulation going on and off in some sort of a fashion against an X modulator. It comes out. I messed with EQ for a little bit, but that's a bad idea because then it just sounded squashed. And we're distorting it. And I worked on this, of course, the whole time with it being distorted, because if I didn't, it would sound not, I would just reach an entirely different spot, and it would just take me longer to figure out exactly what he did. So anyways, that's that. So 1, ratio 2.5, triangle wave, this is how I mapped it. 2, this is how I mapped it, triangle wave of this particular kind at 1. 3, triangle wave, 1.5, no mapping, simply influencing 1 as a permanent timbre change, but is affecting 2 in a serial fashion, thus also being introduced through 2 as a modulation change. Same thing with 4, except for 4 is 7.5. That's a triangle wave too. You'll notice they are slightly different angles. That will affect your sound because these will spit out different frequencies based on the rate of change and blah, blah, blah. And here we've got our effects. It's a delay. It's at like 2 or whatever. And then our effects is coming out is just the wave shaper. Turn off your course. Oh, one thing I almost overlooked, very important, is the cutoff. This thing has been cut off. It's being filtered through it's the state variable filter, and it's got a filter of it's like it's single pole, so that's a 6 dB roll off. So the high harmonics are still there. This just because the cutoff's right here doesn't mean that everything past here is like gone. It's still there. This is just where the cutoff frequency is lying. Let me show you. Maybe you've never seen this. Okay, so here, let's say that this was a gentle 6. You know what? I just realized they don't have them labeled as orders here. But whatever, we can work with this. So the cutoff frequency is technically right where it starts cutting off, okay? And there's 2 bands. And where the cutoff starts is a very different story on what frequencies past it actually get through. So if we do like steepness of 8, that's a very high order filter. If I were to go over to, there's a better example of this. Where are you? TDR Nova. Okay, here's TDR Nova. I'm going to turn off these bands because you don't need to worry. It's an EQ. It's the same thing, except for I could turn on high and low pass, right? So here's a high pass. You see this is 24 dB per octave. This is also known as a fourth order filter. And so a third order filter, we can go to a, that's like a really high order filter, like holy cow. This is a first order filter, 6 dB. Every time you increase by 6 dB, you increase one order. So like first order is 6 dB, second order is 12, third's 18, fourth is, as you just saw, 24. And because, yeah, reasons. So 6 times 4 is 24. It's not technically exactly 6 because of the whole ratio thing and dB expressing logarithmic values is linear and all that stuff. But anyways, you got to be aware of this. So when we put the filter there, there's actually high frequency still there. That's basically what I'm trying to say. And some of you guys are like, oh yeah, I know that. But anyways, that's what this is doing. So that's really important because if I bring it up and we're going through two EQs, so now it sounds really gross. See how it like doesn't really even disappear? 6 dB is very weak. It's not. See how general that is? Like that's so long. Bless me. So anyways, bless my soul. So that is what the deal is going on there. So this just gives general tone shaping to the upper end. It just calms it down a bit because it's already pretty aggressive. So this is on by default. I increased it up a little bit in post, but yeah, that's that. If you have any questions about this patch, let me know. I will do my best to answer you. But there I have like multiple series on Citrus NFN synthesis that explain the basic principles. I'm just showing you a demonstration on how I made a cool sound and some of the thoughts that went into making the cool sound. Subscribe, and I have a Patreon, and I support it when people like you go on Patreon and, you know, support me so I can make more cool videos teaching you how to do sound design type things, making cool sounds. And have a blessed day. The fundamental tends to last the longest. So this is what I got. So it's a pretty simple bell sound. Now, of course, you can do this with a sine wave exceptionally easy and add a few harmonics. So let's talk about how to make this real fast. So, okay, that's what we start off with. And it's a little intimidating to think now I got to get to that bell texture if you've never done it before.